Hello and welcome to EPG Padshala. Today we'll be dealing with the paper Victimology and Victim Justice, Module 2 of the paper. The module is entitled Fear of Crime. The learning objectives of this module would be to understand the meaning of the term fear of crime, to understand the determinants of fear of crime, the causes of the fear of crime, the dimensions of fear of crime, and the coping with the fear of crime. Over the past decades, the fear of crime has become an increasingly significant concern for criminologists, victimologists, policymakers, politicians, policing organizations, the media, and the general public. Fear is a term encompassing a confusing variety of feelings, perspectives, risk estimations, and thus means different things to different people. Crime is an inevitable feature of civilization. Crime is normal because a society exempt from it is an utopian concept. Fear is merely a natural response to crime. The concept of the fear of crime has emerged as the outcome of research and literature in the field. One's understanding of people's perception of safety are generally gathered by surveys that seek to ascertain people's perceived fear of crime. Internationally, studies have identified widespread fear of crime and low perceptions of safety, confirming the view that the fear of crime is common and is a problem in its own right, separate from crime itself. Now let's see the definition of the term fear of crime. Fear of crime can be defined as an emotional reaction characterized by a sense of danger and anxiety. The fear of crime refers to the fear of being a victim of crime as opposed to the actual probability of being a victim of crime. The fear of crime, along with the fear of the streets and the fear of the youth, is said to have been in the Western culture from time immemorial. Though fear of crime can be differentiated into the public's feelings, thoughts, and behaviors about the personal risk of criminal victimization, the distinctions can be made between the tendency to see situations as fearful, the actual experience, while in those situations, the social significance of crime and symbols of crime in people's neighborhoods and in their daily lives. The fear of crime as socially constructed. Fear of crime can also be understood from a social constructionist perspective. The term and the concept of fear of crime did not, for example, enter the public or political lexicon until the mid-1960s. This is not to say that individuals did not fear crime victimization prior to this period, but fear of crime only became part of the political economy when researchers began to measure and analyze it. Once fear of crime had a name, it could be deployed as a political tactic in a law and order politics. It also became something that citizens could experience as an emotional response to the threat of victimization. The formation of a fear of crime feedback loop then allowed survey politicians to be able to use crime fear as a political issue. The fear of crime could be used to activate citizens to reduce their vulnerability to crime victimization. Now let's focus on the picture on the screen. The diagram shows the fear of crime, the loop of the fear of crime, the perception of crime and safety. The public or the citizens feel the perception of crime or safety, and this depends on the confidence in the police. When they have the confidence in the police, their perception of crime and safety is increased. Then, when the public assess the risk of safety, starts the worry loop. They worry about the crime and safety. From this worry comes the crime avoidance and prevention. So, the perception of crime and safety and the confidence of the police are connected, while the assessment of risk and safety, which leads to worry about crime and safety, also leads them to avoid and prevent crime. This is the fear of crime loop. Now, let's move on to the theoretical background of the fear of crime. Criminologists have tried to explain the criminal opportunity and the risk of victimization through many theories. The criminal opportunity and the risk of victimization theories focus on crime as the chief explanatory variable in fear of crime. Moving on to the demographic theories. The demographic theories focus on different socio-demographic groups as a primary unit of analysis in examining factors associated with this fear of crime. The third one is the social theories and environmental theories. The social and environmental theories look to cues in the external environment as factors that trigger fear of crime. Moving on, let's have a look at the causes of the fear of crime. There are two types of these causes. One is the actual cause and one is the anticipated cause. The actual fear and the anticipated fear. In conceptualizing and measuring the fear of crime, the distinction between actual fear and anticipated fear should be kept in mind. It is an emotional reaction, a sense of danger and anxiety about physical harm. The person walking alone in a high crime area at night is experiencing something different than a person telling an interviewer that he or she would be fearful in such an area at night. The actual fear of crime is triggered by some cue, and it is unlikely that a respondent is experiencing actual fear during a survey interview, even as he talks about being in a situation which is fearful. So the actual fear of crime is probably experienced chronically by a relatively small number of people, intermittently in much delimited situations by most. Adequate measurement of fear of crime has to capture not only the types of situations in which people say they would experience fear, but also how often they find themselves in such situations and how strongly they have reacted to such situations in the past. Again, this does not mean that anticipated fear is unimportant. Anticipation of being fearful in particular situations may or may not be based on having experienced actual fear. If such a situation is encountered in the future, actual fear may not be elicited. So people avoid or try to minimize the effects of stressful situations before they occur. We can expect that the anticipated fear as well as the actual fear will produce behavioral responses. Now let's see the connection between fear and physical harm. Fear and physical harm. By linking fear to potential physical harm, we do two things. First, it forces us to differentiate the reaction elicited by the potential fear of property loss from the reaction elicited by the potential fear of physical harm. The former is more cerebral and calculating and might be described as worry, while the latter is more autonomic and emotional. The second thing that linking fear to potential physical harm accomplishes is setting a conceptual framework in which to examine fear of crime relative to fear elicited by events that have a potential of physical harm, but they are not generally perceived as crime. Different degrees of invasion of self cause crime to elicit more fear than do non-criminal events with equal or even higher probabilities of physical harm. For example, a crowd attending a mela, there is no crime, but because of the mob psychology, there are chances that this situation could elicit a fear and cause physical harm as well because of the stampede, the possibility of a stampede. Moving on to the determinants of the fear of crime, 5 general factors are seen as affecting the fear of crime. The first being the actual risk of being victimized by a criminal act. The second could be past experiences of being victimized. The third would be the content of the socialization process connected with particular social roles. Like for example, the head of the family is, or the male member of the family is supposed to protect his family in a situation like this. So the social role puts some fear of physical harm in the head of the family. The fourth would be the content of the media presentations about crime and victimization. The fifth one would be perceived effectiveness of official barriers placed between potential offenders and victims. Therefore, the fear of crime can be influenced by the actual risk, the experience of victimization, the role socialization, the media, and the perceived protection. Let's move on to the dimensions of the fear of crime. There are 4 dimensions to this fear of crime. The first would be the affective aspects of the fear of crime. The second being the cognitive aspects of the fear of crime. The third is the behavioral aspects of the fear of crime. And finally, the public perception of neighborhood stability. Now let's go into detail the 4 aspects of the fear of crime. The first, effective aspects of fear of crime. The core aspect of the fear of crime is the range of emotions that is provoked in citizens by the possibility of victimization. So while people may feel angry and be outraged about the extent or prospect of crime, when asked in surveys who they are afraid of or how worried they are, the answers that people give are 2-dimensional. Those everyday moments of worry that transpire when one feels personally threatened, and B, some more diffuse or ambient anxiety about risk. Therefore, one can distinguish between fear and emotion, a feeling of alarm or dread caused by an awareness of expectation of danger, and some broader anxiety. It should be noted that some people may be more willing to admit their worries and vulnerabilities than others. The second aspect of the fear of crime is cognitive in nature. Concern about crime includes public assessments of the size of the crime problem. The cognitive side of fear of crime includes public perception of the likelihood of falling victim, public sense of control over the possibility, and public estimation of the seriousness of the consequences of crime. So people who feel especially vulnerable to victimization are likely to feel that they are especially likely to be targeted by criminals, also that they are unable to control the possibility, and that the consequences would be especially severe. Additionally, this cognitive aspect also leads them to think that when these three different components of risk perception may interact, the impact of perceived likelihood on subsequent emotional response like worry, anxiety, fear is likely to be especially strong. Moving on to the third aspect of the fear of crime, which is the behavioral aspect. The third way to measure fear of crime is to ask people whether they ever avoid certain stress or take preventive measures. This way, measuring fear of crime can become a relatively straightforward thing because the questions asked tap into the actual behavior and the objective facts, such as the amount of money spent on a burglar alarm or the extra locks you put on the door. Some degree of fear might be healthy for some people, creating a natural defense against crime. So in short, when the risk of crime is real, a specific level of fear might actually be functional. Worry about crime might stimulate precaution, which then makes people feel safer and lower their risk of crime. They reduce their vulnerability once they take protective measures. The fear of crime is a very important feature in criminology. Finally, the public perception of the neighborhood stability. Let's have a look at this aspect of the fear of crime. Perhaps the biggest influence on the fear of crime is public concern about neighborhood disorder, social cohesion, and collective efficacy. So such day-to-day issues such as young people hanging around, poor community spirit, low level of trust and cohesion, information about risk, generate a sense of unease, insecurity, and distrust in the environment. People express through their fear of crime some broader concerns about neighborhood breakdown, the loss of moral authority, the crumbling of civility, and social capital as well. They may also be more likely to link these physical cues to problems of social cohesion, of declining quality of informal social control. So now, having looked at the four aspects of the fear of crime, let's move on to the interpersonal communication and the mass media and see how this influences the fear of crime. Hearing about events, knowing others who have been victimized is a crime multiplier, or processes operating in the residential environment that would spread the impacts of criminal events. Such evidence exists that hearing of the friends or neighbors' victimization increases anxiety that many residents of a neighborhood only know of crime indirectly, that is via channels that they may inflate or deflate or garble the picture. A subject's criminal risk perception is exaggerated by peer communication on crime and only moderated by the own experience. Public perceptions of the risk of crime are no doubt also strongly shaped by mass media coverage. The notion of stimulus similarity may be the key. Say if the reader of a newspaper identifies with the described victim or feels that their own neighborhood bears resemblance to the one described in the paper, then the image of risk may be taken up, personalized, and translated into personal safety concerns, thus increasing the fear of crime. Some say that the media contribute to the climate of fear that is created because of the actual frequency of the victimization is a tiny fraction of potential crime. In spite of the mean world hypothesis, research is needed to take account of the transmission mechanisms through which representations, beliefs, and attitudes about societal risks are propagated in different social and cultural contexts. Moving to the coping with the fear of crime. Individual behavior or reactions to the fear of crime could be many. Among them, avoidance behavior. There are actions taken to decrease exposure to crime by removing oneself from the situation in which the risk of criminal victimization is believed to be high. The second would be protective behavior, increase resistance to the victimization. This could be of two types. Home protection action that seeks to make the home a better protected place, and the personal protection action that taken outside the home to reduce the vulnerability of the individual. The third type would be the insurance behavior, seeks to minimize the cost of victimization. It alters the consequences of the victimization. The fourth one would be the communicative behavior and the sharing of information and emotions related to crime with others. Also, participation behavior, actions in concert with others which are motivated by a particular crime or by crime in general. Information seeking is also another way of coping. This is of two types. One is of consulting other sources, and the second type is environmental scanning. He or she checks out the situations for the cues that are thought to indicate danger. So finally, generally the fear of crime is not a very salient force in determining a wide range of behaviors among people. Rather, it acts as a condition, or it modifies behavior to certain delimited situations, or it produces a rationale for avoiding places and situations that a person would rarely enter in any case. This does not deny that for some segments of the population, fear of crime is a very salient force in people's lives, and often with a very good reason. For these people, individual responses to the fear of crime are made daily and they become an integral part of their lives. The problem is that these same people are concentrated among the poor, powerless, and the options available to them do not permit them to make the type of responses that would effectively insulate or protect them from fear-producing situations. We would call this group the vulnerable group, like the women, the children, the people of the lower economic strata. So the public fear of crime in India has become the basis for a number of social, political decisions and programs. Like, for example, in the aftermath of the Nirbhaya incident in New Delhi and the recent 2017 New Year incidents in Bengaluru, these have brought home the need for CCTV on public transports and on the streets. Also, fear of crime is one of the performance indices in the evaluation of police as per the Padmanabhaya Committee report that stressed the necessity of developing performance indices that would reflect the public's fear of crime. Thank you.